We are live.
And yes, we are live on YouTube too. Chalo. So shall we start today's session?
Yes, sir.
Do we have people logging in?
Let us wait for 5 minutes, sir.
Yes, yes. Most definitely. There is so much that we have, to say about INSTUCEN also today.
Yeah.
But I mean, we can start by saying that before we start the session proper.
Yes.
So a very, very warm welcome to everybody who's going to be listening to this, especially as a recording, since very few of you all are here at this point. Thank you very much for logging in to this series of lives that we're doing on YouTube to celebrate World Heritage Week. So World Heritage Week is celebrated by the government, and World Heritage Day is celebrated by the Archaeological Survey of India on the 25th of November. So week starting 19th, I know it's a bit of an odd time for the week to start, is the World Heritage Week. At INSTUCEN, we will be working through the entire week this week, from Monday to Sunday, to bring you lives from 5 to 6 p.m. every day on our YouTube channel. And this will, of course, be saved on YouTube for those who can't listen in from 5 to 6 and would like to come in a little later. We've got some amazing programming that we've got out for December this year. And there's a lot of stuff that I've got to tell you about before I can start today's talk. Starting today at 7:30, we have an amazing series. This is probably going to be the first time ever in India, and I don't know if it's the first time in South Asia, that we're going to actually have a series of lectures teaching you how to read the cuneiform script of the ancient Persians, also, well, de facto, the ancient Sumerians, the Assyrians, the Medes, the Elamites, so on and so forth, who all use this amazing script from the past, but we'll be concentrating mainly on reading Old Persian through cuneiform. And for that, we have the amazing Shailesh Sagar, who will be conducting courses. Today's lecture, of course, will be an introductory lecture, which will be by Ramesh Gauri Raghavan. So it's going to be an amazing series. If you haven't yet logged on to it, there's still time to do so. Recordings will be available throughout the duration of the series. So even if you're catching this live late, guys, it's going to be one hell of a ride. And like I said, it's going to be path-breaking. We're going to be talking about this years and years from now. I think decades from now, this will be a landmark moment as far as the teaching of a script like cuneiform is concerned. So I look forward to seeing many of you all log in for these series of lectures on how to read cuneiform from today. We've also got our next civilization series going on. So we're going to be doing Civilizations of the World Series 4, Civilizations of Southeast Asia, from the 5th of December onwards. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you all there. We will be running a pre-recorded lecture on the 4th, I think, for all of you all who will be logging in. And this will be a lecture on what is a civilization, so that it doesn't have to take up the 10 lectures, especially if you've heard this before. And we're really going to, we've decided along with Southeast Asia, we're going to club Sri Lanka for us. So it's going to be an amazing, amazing series of talks with some fabulous visuals. And I really hope that you all guys will log on for this. Apart from that, we've got some very good walks that are taking place. On the 3rd of December, we have a walk at the Botanical Gardens with Dr. Chandrasekhar Lattu, a very, very senior botanist who was with the Institute of Science for many years. So that's going to be one hell of a walk. But from the 17th early morning to the 18th late evening, we're doing a 2-day overnight trip of the forts of the Konkan, especially the forts of the Raigad district. And we're looking at the maritime forts. It's a 2-day trip with INSTUCEN. Keep your eyes peeled. Follow us on YouTube and follow us on Instagram and follow us on Twitter for our updates and on Facebook, so we can tell you all about these trips. The trip on the 17th and 18th will include the forts of Kulaba, which is the Alibag Fort, Revdanda, Korlai, Padmadurg, and the fort of Janjira. And we'll finish off at the beautiful memorials at Khokri before we come back to Mumbai. So that's an overnight trip. I look forward to seeing you all there. And then early in January, on the 8th of January, we have the caves of Elephanta with INSTUCEN. That will be a full day trip. We'll be leaving in the morning. Breakfast and lunch will be inclusive. And in February, on a date not yet specified, we'll be looking at the caves of Karla and Bhaja in a single day. So I really, really look forward to seeing all of you all for these sessions and with us at INSTUCEN for all of this. So that said, like I said, it's World Heritage Week, and I'm here essentially to talk to you all about heritage. The India Studies Center Trust has been working in the field of heritage since 2010. At least I have been participating since 2010, and they've been active since a little earlier before that. We've done some amazing work along with the University of Mumbai's Center for Extramural Studies. We conducted the first ever excavations in the 155-year history at that time. I mean, now it's much more years. Of the University of Mumbai, we excavated the site of Chandore. They were fascinating excavations. We got much, much more than we thought of. And the story of the Chandore excavations itself is a fascinating story of how you can't let any bit of heritage go when it's pointed out to you. So I'm going to start by talking about that. Very early on in 2011, Mrs. Kunda from the neighboring village of Vadgar Bhatejiwadi called up Dr. Karnik at the Center for Extramural Studies to say that I've heard you started a department of archaeology. And, you know, next to us is this village called Chandore, which has some very, very ancient caves, very, very ancient temples. And I think you should come there and see the ancient monuments that are lying over here. So Dr. Karnik asked me over coffee about what we should do. And, you know, trained as I was in archaeology, knowing fully well that 9 out of 10 times what happens is this is a, well, people think things are very ancient, people think things are very important and very old, but they're normally just, 50 or 60 years old at the most, or if you're really lucky, 100 years old, and really not of any great importance at all. But 1 out of every 10 times, there's a jackpot waiting to be hit. So as I told her, I said, ma'am, 9 out of 10 times, it's nothing. 1 out of 10 times the jackpot, and you can't let it go even a single time. So you have to go after it. So we decided to make a picnic out of it. We picked up Dr. Dandekar on the way with us, who came down from Pune, and we zipped down to Vadgar Bhatejiwadi. We had a nice breakfast with Kundamaoshi, and then we came down to see the site of Chandore, which was essentially a dilapidated plinth, next to which was a rock-cut step well, cut into the laterite soil, a series of steps going down into what was a very nondescript looking square well. What was amazing at first sight was that there were 2 niches cut in the side of the wall of the steps, one of which still had an image sitting very securely in it. And this stylistically was a typical Shilahara Yadava period 12th, 13th century image of Haragauri, a rather rare variant of a Shiva Parvati image. You normally see the Uma Maheshwara image, but when instead of the lion, you see the lizard of Gauri, the iguana of Gauri as it's called, you then realize that this is a Haragauri image. And Dr. Jamkhetkar quickly pointed out to us when we showed him the images later that this was a Haragauri image and that this was absolutely fascinating. In front, alongside this was another dilapidated temple to one side with a sunken Garbhagriha, most probably what looked like a Shaivite temple, in front of which was a badly disturbed Nandi Mandapa with a Nandi sitting on it, covered in shrubbery. Once again, very Shilahara Yadava looking. And there were two Sati stones lying over there and a large Sati pillar with a double Sati on it. We realized we'd hit a very, very unique site. As we explored around, we found another hero stone, a massive hero stone of the late Chalukyan style. We also realized that there was a beautiful image of Vishnu, Sheshashayi Vishnu, and we later realized that this image was originally in the lower niche of the stepwell. We decided to take up a small-scale excavation, and that too, just on a whim to train our students from our Center for Extramural Studies certificate course. I thought it would be about 50,000 rupees would be the minimum cost. We exceeded that. We spent 56,500 rupees that year. And yes, my friends in the ASI laugh at the kind of ridiculous budget in which we managed to excavate. But by the time we finished excavating 4 years later, we had galvanized the local public. We had the archaeology department's foundations being laid for the University of Mumbai. We had the University of Mumbai actually on board and actually giving us a small grant and aid of $1 lakh a year. We also had the Mahad Manufacturers Association come in and help us. We had some amazing stuff that the press did for us, the local press and the Mumbai press. I can't thank Prajakta Kasle enough for a lovely article that did so much for us. And thanks to Mrs. Karnik and all her friends and contacts, we ended up doing a beautiful 4-year excavation. We realized that the way in which the villages of the Konkan are laid out today in their respective wadis is something that goes back at least 800 years. We were able to understand the spatio-temporal locations of these wadis. We were able to understand the drift over time. And this was work in the Konkan that had never ever been done before. So from a small-scale excavation, which was just visiting a site because somebody felt that was old, we have rewritten to a large extent the medieval archaeology of the Konkan region. So this is our heritage. And as I keep telling people, and I told the people of Chandore when we were working with them, this is our heritage, this is your heritage. So what is this heritage business and what is it all about? Heritage, like culture, is a very, very difficult thing to pinpoint. But essentially, heritage is what you are made up of. Your entire past, which decides your present and which dictates your future, is your heritage, and your culture is your history and your archaeology and so much more. Your heritage decides who you are, where you are, what language you speak, what food you eat, what religion you follow, what economic status you belong to, so on and so forth. Your heritage is something that makes you proud, gives you an enormous sense of accomplishment, gives you an enormous sense of pride, gives you a sense of place. It might not always be very rosy, but it does do that. And in doing all of this, it cements your position in toto, in society, in the world, and it centers you. Your heritage is also the heritage of the future. It is very important for us to preserve this heritage. This heritage that we have, and we have tons of it in India. And I sometimes think that it is sad that we have so much heritage in India because we have very, very little respect for this amazing heritage of ours. We have heritage in our cities, we have heritage in our villages, we have heritage on our roads, we have heritage on our coasts, we have heritage in our hills. There is almost no place in India which does not have a long association with the past and which at some time or the other has not played some kind of pivotal role in the past. After conducting the excavations at Chandore for the University of Mumbai, we then embarked to the University of Mumbai on a very, very large scale project, as we felt. And we sometimes felt that it was perhaps biting off a little more than we could chew. The Center for Extramural Studies, the India Center Trust, and the Satya College together came up with the SolSet project. This was to be an urban archaeology project, an explorations project in the region known as Salsette, which is basically your region of the island city, of the non-island city of Bombay, I'd like to call it, but it's also an island. So the island of Salsette was the large island to the north of what was Bombay. And Bombay essentially ended at Mahim. So from Bandra all the way to the Vasai Creek and extending all the way to one side of Thane on the, well, western side of the Thane Creek, and then down all the way to Devnar, which is now part and parcel of Salsette. This region was the region that we decided to work on. Once again, we thought there would be some traces of heritage still visible. Much to our surprise, the kind of heritage that we found in Mumbai was fascinating. We realized we were running one of the biggest urban archaeology projects in India, urban heritage projects in India. And we were doing so, well, on a shoestring budget, because, well, you have to realize this was the university and money was always scarce. We were very grateful to the Mumbai Metropolitan Railway Corporation, which helped us out with a decent fund and which allowed us to put up in the first season 5 teams and the second season 6 teams, consisting of 5 students and 1 supervisor each. So the supervisors were senior archaeologists. The students were all our students from the Center for Extramural Studies and a few non-extramural studies students at that time. And we all came together and scoured specifically designated areas of the city. So Dr. Suraj Pandit, myself, Dr. Abhijit Tandekar, Dr. Prachi Moge, Sri Vinayak Parab, and of course, Tejaswini Afle were all project heads or team heads. And we systematically scoured our areas. And much to our absolute and total surprise, there was far more heritage lying on the ground of the urban metropolis that we call Mumbai city than we had dreamt of before. We found a number of inscriptions, some decipherable, some undecipherable. We found large quantities of sculpture going back to the medieval period and spanning the entire medieval period from the early medieval to the late medieval. We found Islamic monuments, we found Hindu monuments, we found Portuguese monuments, we found prehistoric sites, and we actually took a small-scale geological sondage at one of these geological sites, at one of these prehistoric sites, and found some amazing Mesolithic remains off the coast of Mumbai. So we're looking forward to publishing the same in the coming year in 2023, and we hope to be able to present this to the people in general and to the academic community. But what we realized was that there was a phenomenal amount of heritage just begging to be found. So I keep telling people there is so much heritage around here. There were 5 Gadegals that we found. 3 were just in Uttan and Korai, 1 in Bhandup, and then 1, much to our surprise, near Powai. So our students were well trained and our students were incredibly dedicated, and they did a fantastic job scouring the streets of Bombay, the Salsette part of Bombay that is, and found some amazing stuff for us. In the midst of this, Dr. Karnik asked Dr. Salunke of the BRC whether there was anything he had ever found. And he said there were a couple of stones that they had found and placed in the godown. One of these was a beautiful broken slab of an inscription of a king that ruled from Bombay. And this bit of history we didn't know at all. To date, we had found 2 inscriptions of this king called Hambir Rao, one from Uran and one from Nagaon near Alibag. But for the first time, we found an inscription at the BRC, which told us that Hambir Rao was a vassal of Firoz Shah Tughlaq, was ruling the region known as Thane Konkan or Konkan Thane, which essentially is the modern Thane and Raigad districts, and of course the Mumbai districts. And he was ruling this from his capital city at Mahim Bimbas Thane. We've published this in the in the Asiatic Society of Mumbai's journal. And it is perhaps the first time that we know about this one king dynasty that ruled from Bombay this entire region during a time in the 14th century AD. The inscriptions are roughly 1366, 1367, 1368. For the first time, we know that this king ruled this region. And we also have evidence that we didn't really expect to find of a pre-existing dynasty whose ruler Bimba was considered to be a quasi-historical hero. The Patare Prabhus, the Pachkal Shis, etc., talked about their hero king Bimba and referred to a text known as the Bimba Khan. Well, much to our surprise, we found in the BRC inscription the description of the capital city of Hambirrao as Mahim Bimbasthane, Mahim, the city of Bimba. So for the first time, this quasi-historical character actually found mention in history itself, leading us to realize that a lot of what was written in the Mahikavati Chipakar and the Bimba Khan was actually fact and not fiction, as had been supposed by many, many earlier historians. So history is a continuously unfolding process. We realize now the importance of Mahim. We realize the amazing heritage that Mahim has. Our students have been working in the island city also. They've worked at Mankeshwar in Masgaon. They've worked at Mahim itself, and they've worked at many other places and brought to light some absolutely fantastic heritage. In fact, those works were the works that spurred us on to do the Solset project. So working backwards, let me tell you that Siddharth Kale found a beautiful kichaka. A kichaka is the top of a pillar, which has extensions going out from it to hold beams on it. So kichakas are very common in temples in India. You have one-sided kichakas, two-sided, three-sided, four-sided kichakas, which hold up various kinds of beams, roof beams, depending on where those pillars are placed. Very rarely, you have a five-sided kichaka, which automatically means that you're looking at an octagonal mandapa that is being held up by it. Interestingly for us, what we know from the work done in the heritage zone that we call ancient Indian architecture is that if you have one critical architectural member of a typical Indian temple, you can actually recreate the entire temple. Yes, from a single member. If it is a critical member of the temple, since all of these temples are made and built proportionately, if you have one critical member, you can then extrapolate the entire temple. So from a single kichaka, which is outside the Johnson compound in Mahim, which was found while digging it up to lay the foundations for the present building there, was saved by the watchman to create a kind of, shall we say, retirement fund for himself in the little temple that he has created there. He saved for us the evidence that there was once at Mahim a larger, more elaborate temple along the same pattern as the one we see at Ambarnath today. And if you haven't been to Ambarnath with Dr. Kumud Kanetkar, then get in touch with us and we'll organize a trip with her to the Ambarnath temple. And it's one of the most amazing Shiva temples going back all the way to the Shilahara period. So a similar larger temple originally existed at the site at Mahim, and further evidence came to us from it, surprisingly from one of our students. The fact that we were running a certificate course in archaeology open to all those who had interest in it. One of our students, Resham Gurekar, one day called me up, quite frantically saying, sir, I'm at Mahim police station. And I remember we completely shocked and said, child, are you okay? What are you doing at the police station? Fearing the worst. But much to my surprise, she'd only gone there for a passport verification, completely forgotten about it, because embedded in the portico of the Mahim police station, in the twin pillars and twin pilasters of the three arches that make up the portico, are four very, very interesting fragments from our past. One of them is a beautiful hero stone showing the death of a hero at sea, something that is very, very rarely shown. It actually is an incredibly rare stone, not just because of the death at sea, but because it had a small inscription on it, which is sadly too mutilated to read any longer. Hero stones with inscriptions are phenomenally rare. They're rarer than hen's teeth in Maharashtra. So from this itself would have been enough But next to it was a beautiful image of Chapeta Hanuman. That's Hanuman with his hand raised up. Next to that, there was a very, very rare image of Vayu, the wind god with a scarf unfurled behind him. And the third fragment was a Shiva sitting with a square and holding a square shield. Again, not a very common depiction. What we realized was that we were looking at further fragments, in all probability from the same temple whose Kichaka had been dug up at the Johnson compound. Along with the Kichaka, we traced a few other fragments, including a Surasundari. We traced a few other decorative motifs lying in the compound of the Sitla Devi temple. And we also found an earlier Buddhist image carved into a beautiful votive stupa not far away from Goa Portuguesa in the compound of one of the buildings, once again dug up when they were digging up the foundations of that building. So the importance of Mahim becomes more and more relevant. Today, we just look at Mahim as one little coastal strip, highly populated, densely packed with buildings. But the Mahim of the 14th century was very, very different from the Mahim we see today. It was a beautiful crescent-shaped island with beaches on one side and a port on the inner side where the Mahim station is today. And this kind of heritage is what the work that we've been doing has been has been bringing to light. So Rajesh Pujari and Anurag Shinde were responsible for publishing some of this work along with Siddharth Kale, and so much more work was done in the same vein. There is a beautiful Kannada inscription of the time of Aurangzeb, not of Aurangzeb, but of the time of Aurangzeb that we have at the Mankeshwar temple at Masgaon, which was also published. Fascinating work was done at Parel and on the remnants that are lying around the Baradevi at Parel by Harshada Virkud. So a lot of our students have been continuously working, and we are very proud to say that the kind of work that we've been doing in heritage has consistently increased the data available to the city to understand its past. So we are nothing if we are not a product of our past, and this past needs to be taken care of. Sadly for us today, in a very modern era of the kind of entertainment that we have forgotten to go out and get in touch with our past. We have forgotten what it means to go out into the city and see what it has to offer. No city in the world has more forts than Mumbai, apart from the city of Portsmouth, which has a plethora of little forts. Only the city of Mumbai has the number of forts that it does. And there are even forts in Mumbai that existed, which no longer do. And all of this is part and parcel of what makes up our city. So just the forts of Mumbai and visiting the forts of Mumbai are something that you can spend an entire month doing. From the remnant Fort George that we have in the St. George Hospital compound to the Sivri Fort, which was one great gunpowder magazine of the 17th century, 18th centuries AD. From there, the Sion Fort. In between the two, the fortified tower at Wadala, which is now sadly converted into a Shiv Sena Shaka, but maybe that will preserve some of it. The beautiful tower at above the Sion station itself, which is rarely ever visited. The Dharavi Fort, or the Kala Killa as it's called. From there, of course, the Mahim Fort, sadly encroached, but we heard this year that finally the government has decided to empty the fort and to bring the fort back to its former glory. So that will be fascinating. Then there's the little Worli Fort, which is more of a lookout post and a warning post, which is perhaps one of the most well-preserved forts in Mumbai. And again, one of Mumbai's great secrets. And then finally, the amazing fortified tunnels at Governor's Beach. I'm 53 years old, and I have seen those tunnels when I was about, I think, 8 years old. They were not lost. The groundskeepers always knew about them. Most of the, shall I say, the denizens who were at the top of the pile at Governor's, well, the governors of Bombay were not really interested in what was lying on their lawns. And the Mali and his team would keep their jhadu and their tagaras and their baskets and things inside the mouth of the tunnel, which had an iron door on it. As children running around the governor's beach, because my friends Cherry and Charlie, their dad used to be the doctor to the governor in residence. We spent some very happy hours rambling around as kids in our summer holidays all over the governor's mansion property. Very happy memories from those days, especially of Governor's Beach, the only beach in Bombay that I know which was raked every day. Yes, the sand was raked at Governor's Beach. I don't know if it's still done. So this series of tunnels under Governor's Beach was actually part of a fortified network which was built before the First World War and which had some of the most amazing muzzle-loading cannons, some of the largest muzzle-loading cannons of their era, which were also rediscovered recently. This time, of course, I don't think we're going to lose them because the present governor has had them beautifully mounted in front of the governor's main now building, where when the governor gives his audiences. So this time, I think they will be preserved well, and in front of them, the entrance to the tunnels has also been neatly landscaped and put together. So all of this just makes up an enormous amount of just military history belonging to the British era. And this is a history which we know so little about. There are cannons strewn across the length and breadth of the city. There is a cannon that is worshipped in Bombay. Yes, there is a temple to a cannon where a cannon is upended into the ground and is worshipped as a shivling. There are many cannons which are used as bollards to tie up ships, especially if you go to the Gateway of India, you'll see one very prominent one over there on the left-hand side of the gateway as you go there. There are a number of beautiful muzzle-loading naval cannons. Two of them are outside what is called Gun Gate, which is behind the Asiatic Society of Mumbai. The largest one, which I think is a 100-pound cannon, if I'm not wrong, which could only have been mounted on a battleship, is actually in the lawns of the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya. Sadly for us, it's on the out gate of the old driveway. And since rarely does anybody drive in and out of the museum any longer, the other doors or the exit doorway is kept closed. And most people only go towards till the portico and back. As a result of which, that beautiful cannon sitting over there has been lost to us forever and ever and ever. So there is so much material like this scattered all over the city, and so much material that we can learn from just about the last 100 years or so. So this is just to give you a little idea about some of the kinds of heritage that are lying about. There are beautiful fountains in the city. The Wellington Fountain opposite the Eros Cinema, which has been beautifully restored, actually tells us in great detail about the man that Europe knows as the fellow who defeated Napoleon, right? And the Wellington Fountain actually has the various battles at Wellington Fort carved out upon it and listed upon it. Sadly, most of us who use the area around the fountain use it only to park our cars or pass it by in traffic. And we don't even realize what an important event and an important person is part and parcel of that circle over there. Wellington, previously Wellesley, before he was made Wellington by the Queen, was essentially, let me just put this off before it keeps ringing for the umpteenth time. Right. So, Wellesley was the Governor General's younger brother, and General Wellesley was responsible for defeating the Marathas, first at the Battle of Assaye and then at the Battle of Kavilgarh, and was actually responsible for the fall of the Maratha Empire. In 1805, when Kavilgarh fell, that was effectively the end of the Marathas. 1818, the Battle of Kharki was more of a mopping up operation than anything else. He went on to fight Napoleon. He defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo. and was later made Lord Wellington for his services to the nation, as in the British nation, of course. Generals like him were responsible for the creation of the empire on which the sun did not set. You don't have to like the British, you don't have to love the British, but you cannot deny that they built the city of Mumbai and they made it what it is today. The city of Mumbai would not have been had it not been for a series of events which make up our heritage, which are very, very far from it. Charles I lost his head. Yes, he had it chopped off by a man called Oliver Cromwell, the only dictator who ever ruled Great Britain. Oliver Cromwell was a very nasty sort of man. He gave away all the king's money and spent it all. Yes, it's a terrible thing. When the king's son, Charles II, who had been hiding in France, was brought back on Cromwell's death, he realized that he inherited, a kingship and was totally flat broke. The only way that he could recover his lost fortunes was to make a very good marriage and bring in a very good dowry. And this is why he married the heiress with the maximum dowry, one Isabella of Portugal. The Infanta of Portugal, poor thing, history says was so not so good looking. I mean, I know that's a terrible thing to say, but that's what history says, that nobody really wanted to marry her despite what her father was willing to dower her with. And then Charles II just happened to be at the right time at the right place. And they were married off, and the King of Portugal offered XYZ and threw in this little group of beautiful islands off the coast of India called Bombay. And this is how Bombay became part of the British Empire. Yes, I know. The British didn't know what to do with it. They leased it promptly to the East India Company for the magnificent sum of £10 per year in 1661. By the time the East India Company actually got to Bombay and took possession, it was 1669. And they finally, only after the repeated sack of Surat, shifted their factories to Bombay. And Bombay then grew. Bombay built up the main Bombay fort, which has completely disappeared today. If you read S.M. Edwards' book on Bombay, there's a lot that we can find out about it. We can actually trace the fort. Ramesh Gauri Raghavan does a brilliant walk of the fort, tracing actually the ramparts and the old fort city. So do many others, but his is a really spectacular one. If you ever get a chance, do take part in it. Heritage walks have become a huge way in which you can come into contact with specific parts of your city and your story, depending on where you are. In Mumbai, we have Yobo Cummins, we have INSTUCEN, we have Alisha Sadikot, we have the Asiatic Society of Mumbai, we have Khaki Tours, we have Go Halu Halu, and others. I'm sure there are many that are missing out, and I apologize for missing out on them. Soulful Journeys does walks also. So there are a lot of people doing walks and events in Mumbai. And these events are all about the story, the past, the culture, the people of the city. There are a large number of groups on social media who also deal with these things. There are fascinating groups. There's a newish one called Houses of Bandra, which actually is on Instagram and which does some fascinating photo heritage of old Bandra, which is completely disappearing at a ridiculously fast rate. So there is history and there is heritage all around us. There are forts on the coast. There are forts on the hills. There are beautiful rock-cut caves. And just as Mumbai is a city with more forts than any other apart from Portsmouth, it is the #1 city as far as rock-cut caves are concerned. No city, mind you, no city in the world has as many rock-cut caves, man-made rock-cut caves, which are part of its environs as Mumbai does. There are more than 120 rock-cut caves just at Kaneri itself. You also have the slightly older, at least that's my understanding, that we can argue about it, older caves at Mahakali, which are originally called Kundivite caves. We also have a brilliant rock-cut temple, perhaps one of the first Brahmanical rock-cut temples in India at Jogeshwari. We have fascinating temples at Mandapeshwar, at Borivali, which were then reused by the Jesuits during the Portuguese era. We also have the fascinating island of Elephanta in Mumbai harbor itself, which is, well, de facto understood as being Puri. The older name is Gharapuri, and this is supposed to be the Puri, the capital of the Konkan Mauryas. Now, we can argue about that bit, but it has one of the most exquisite Shaivite rock-cut shrines anywhere in the world, well, anywhere in India. And so many linkages can be drawn between Ellora and the Elephanta caves. Brilliant excavations carried out supposedly by the Kalachuri vassals of the Rashtrakutas. If you read Suraj Pandit's book, well, even the Traikutakas were in the game earlier before them, and perhaps many others afterwards. There were many movable sculptures, some of which are in the CSMVS today, and which are again a forgotten chapter of the history of Elephanta. So Elephanta Island itself is a fascinating place. It's also got these beautiful British era gun turrets on top, which were meant to defend the harbor, and which a couple of those guns are still in place. I think it's called Gun Point, and the hill is now officially called Gun Hill. So much to see just in the city itself. If you go out of the city, so many more rock-cut caves, Karla Bhaja and Betsa near Lonavala, Kundane on the way near Karjat, Rajmachi. So just this zone has so much rock-cut heritage belonging to the Buddhists. About 120 kilometers south of Bombay are the beautiful caves of Kuda, with some of the most spectacular rock-cut inscriptions dating back to the 2nd to the 4th centuries AD. In front of Kuda is the port of Mandad, which we thought was an Indo-Roman port, and excavations that we've conducted have proved was an Indo-Roman port. But actually, the excavations also tell us that the history goes back much, much further than what we thought before, and goes back to a period even before the Indo-Roman trade of the 1st, 2nd century AD, perhaps as early as the 3rd century BC. So there is so much that we have available to us in the way of our heritage. There is, of course, the spectacular colonial building heritage that we have around us. I live in Mumbai. The VT station was spitting distance away from my house. Before that was, of course, the beautiful GPO building. So just those two buildings were just spectacular. Opposite the GPO was Malhotra House, which was again a fascinating building in the later styles. There was Blackie House across, then the commissioner's headquarters, all Gothic buildings. So some very beautiful Gothic architecture in South Bombay where I grew up, some amazing Art Deco architecture, some fascinating Indo-Saracenic, as we call it, which is basically just Islamic style architecture using RCC. I know architectural purists are going to get really upset at me for saying this, but that's what it is. Buildings like the BMC building, which, perhaps gets short shrift because it's opposite the, we used to call it the VT station, now the CSMT. So many more buildings like this, the St. Xavier's College building, the St. Xavier's School building, the beautiful Metro Cinema House, the Kawasi Jahangir Hall in front of it, so on and so forth. So there is an endless amount of built heritage in the city of Mumbai itself. Those fascinating Art Deco buildings on one side of the Oval Maidan, the very, very imposing Gothic buildings on the other side of the Maidan, essentially that very, very dark and foreboding High Court, next to it the University with the Rajabai Tower, next to it, of course, the Archives building, so on and so forth. So many amazing pieces of architecture in our city, so many amazing styles of architecture represented in our city. Very few people realize those amazing Edwardian buildings that make up the Honeyman Circle opposite the town hall, which itself is a very Greco-Roman style building. So Libraries abound in Mumbai, old libraries with lakhs of books in them. At last count, I think there are 18 lakh books and periodicals in the Asiatic Society of Mumbai. And that itself is a heritage that is invaluable as far as the city of Mumbai is concerned. There's the K.R. Kama Library, there is the Pitit Library, so on and so forth. So I could go on and on about the buildings of South Bombay. There are equally interesting buildings in other parts of the city. There are mosques, there are churches, there are temples. The very, very beautiful Mahalakshmi temple built on the coast during the British era, privately built. And the amazing Magdum Ali Mahimi shrine at Mahim, Kutbe Konkan, after whom the JJ flyover is named, sadly. Yes, I say sadly because everybody calls it the JJ flyover instead of the Magdum Ali Mahimi flyover. But, well, that's, I suppose, when you start at JJ school and you end at JJ hospital, that's bound to happen. Magdum Ali Mahimi was the son of a man who had been imported from Iraq by the Gujarat Sultan, who also gave his own sister in marriage to a gentleman to set up a school of Islamic thought at Mahim. His son became the first man to write an exegesis of the Quran in India, and for which he is called the pillar of the Konkan, Kutbe Konkan. The people who built the city, hundreds and thousands and lakhs of people who will go nameless, who all contributed to making the city what it is and who contributed to its heritage. People like Ashok Vaidya, who has a very soft spot in my mind, who gave the city its iconic vada pav. The kind of dishes that you get on the streets of Mumbai, which you get nowhere else. The typical bhel puri, which is made by immigrants who came from North India. The dabeli from people from the Kutch. The puri bhaji that evolved more out of Gujarati homes than anything else. How many cities do you know that can claim of all of this and dosas and sikh kebabs on the streets at any given time? The amazing heritage of the Irani restaurants. Refugees who came to India in the 19th century took up corner properties which were cheaper than any others. They couldn't believe their luck. Most Indians wouldn't take them for bad vastu, but as far as they were concerned, they gave you frontage on two sides. So they took up these properties. They knew only how to bake, and they had a long tradition of tea shops that they'd set up in Iran, and they set up exactly those in Mumbai. And they catered to everybody in Mumbai, from the blue-collar workers to the white-collar workers of Mumbai. The Irani restaurants were open to all and sundry. They had some very, very interesting back histories. But what is most intriguing and something that most people today don't know is a snippet of our heritage that originally communities would not drink from each other's cups. So pink cups and saucers were kept for Hindus, green cups and saucers for Muslims, and white cups and saucers for Christians, Jews, and Parsis, who didn't really have these taboos. And the waiter in the restaurant, the Irani restaurant, would, by looking at the people, know exactly what kind of colored cup to bring tea in. And they were that good at it. Also, there were a lot of clues that people gave of their own heritage because of the clothes that they wore. Today, we are all into shirts and pants and jeans and t-shirts. And that made it more and more difficult for the waiters. And it made a lot of young college boys tease waiters by asking them, do you think I'm Muslim? Do you think I'm a Hindu? So on and so forth. So the Iranis finally decided at the end of the 50s that enough was enough. And they were going to go into white cups and saucers. And you could either drink your tea or be damned. But it tells us about the social heritage of the city. It tells us how the social heritage of the city changed over time and how the city came together to become what it is today. So the social fabric of the city is also very, very much part and parcel of its heritage. The philanthropists who built Pia House and who built fountains and who built libraries and reading rooms and hospitals and panjara poles for animals that were sick or ill or discarded. The amazing hospital built for animals at Parel, probably one of the first of its kind anywhere in Asia. To the best of my knowledge, definitely the first of its kind in India. And of course, the list of philanthropy is endless: colleges, schools, etc., etc., etc. Bridges. There would have been no causeway across from Mahim to Bandra had it not been for an individual person selling her own jewelry and having the causeway built so that people would stop dying in the monsoons by crossing the Mahim Creek in very, very rough seas. So many people and so many events and so many buildings and so many artifacts make up the heritage of our city, of our state, and of our country at large. And ladies and gentlemen, it's World Heritage Week, and it's time we gave our heritage its due. It's time we stopped writing Anil loves Pinky on top of our forts and our mosques and our temples in oil paint of all things. It's time we stopped using our heritage as a urinal. And it's time that we got a little proactive about all of this. And I welcome you all to INSTUCEN Trust and our activities. Get in touch with us. Follow us on Instagram. Follow us on Twitter. Follow us on Facebook. Write to us on our emails. And we'll be only too happy to engage with you all. There's an amazing smorgasbord of lectures coming up through this entire week. And do log in at 5 o'clock every day. And I look forward to seeing you all there. If there are some questions, you may ask them on YouTube. And our students are on standby to help you with them. And our colleagues are on standby to send them over to me. So let me know if there are any questions.
No questions, sir.
So if there are no questions, then I'll just reiterate to you all that at 7:30 today, we start an amazing series of lectures. The first time ever anywhere in the whole of South Asia, we have somebody teaching cuneiform in the online context to us. And in Mumbai, we have Shailesh Sirsagar doing a fantastic series teaching Persian inscriptions for cuneiform, a script that is read by very, very few people all over the world. You still have a chance to log in. We've also got some amazing other programming coming up throughout the rest of the month. In December, we have the fourth of our civilization series. We'll be talking about the civilizations of Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia. And there will be 10 lectures, live lectures, and one recorded lecture in the beginning. So the series starts on the 5th of December. But on the 4th of December, we will be sharing a pre-recorded lecture which basically defines what a civilization is, so that those who have done the other civilization series don't have to sit through that again. But for the rest of you all, please join us, as I said, and we'll be very happy to have you in the civilization series. We've also got on the 17th and 18th of December, a fabulous tour of the forts of the Raigad region. And we're looking at 5 forts over there. We're looking at the forts of Kolaba, Revdanda, Kurlai, Padmadurg, and Janjira. We're also going to throw in the tombs of Khokhri. So that's a 2-day trip on the 17th and 18th. We leave early in the morning on the 17th. We come back late in the evening on the 18th. We've also got a brilliant walk that is coming. And we've got some amazing trips to the caves outside Mumbai. And I look forward to seeing all of you all for those also with INSTUCEN. And we've got, on 3rd December, we've got a walk at the Botanical Gardens with Dr. Chandrasekhar Lattu, a very renowned botanist who worked with the Indian Institute of Science for many years. On the 8th of January, we have the Elephanta Caves, which will be a full-day session. We leave in the morning on the first ferry, and we come back late in the afternoon. This will include lunch and dinner. Breakfast and lunch. We also have the Karla and Baja caves coming up in February for those who are interested. So There's a lot of very interesting programming on heritage coming up at the INSTUCEN Trust. Again, like I said, follow us here and follow us on Instagram and on YouTube and on Twitter. So looking forward to seeing you all. Thank you very, very much for listening in, guys. And have a happy Heritage Week. And please respect your heritage. Thank you.